Welcome to our third season. This podcast started out as sort of a what-if project and has morphed into something bigger, thanks in part to the continued support of the regional offices of education in Illinois' Area 5. That's sort of the southwestern part down by St. Louis, and to you, of course, our listeners. My name is Matt Weld, and I'm the host / producer / director here on the show. And I have had the honor of having conversations with all sorts of people talking about so many aspects of education. I remember back to my first episode where recording it was a complete disaster. I was trying to record in person using a video camera with wireless mics. The first time through didn't take, and I had to drive the hour back to Vandalia, Illinois to ask my guest, Angela Reeder, for a do-over. Of course, Angela was her usual gracious self and acquiesced, and the show started there. We've had authors, attorneys, physicians, administrators, professors, and teachers on the show, and they've all told their story and how it relates to teaching and learning. I know I have learned so much. I feel like every time I have one of these conversations, I have a private half hour, 45 minutes, hour of professional development, and I'm pleased to be able to share it with you, and I hope you all have learned something too. If you are just now finding the Teacher's Classroom, you can leave a review on iTunes or Google Podcasts and then click to follow us so that you'll be notified of all our new episodes for this upcoming season. The Teacher's Classroom lives at teachillinois.com/podcast, where you can find all the episodes plus our show notes and descriptions. Teach Illinois itself is an online professional development platform for educators. Much of what we offer is free, and we try to align all our content to the Danielson framework. But enough about the show. What I'm really excited about is the opening of our third season. We're setting the stage for this year with a conversation around empathy, something I think every one of us will need in abundance in 2020. In my conversation with Katy Fattaleh of the NORA Project, we discussed the difference between empathy, sympathy, and compassion. She also makes a case for why the term disability is not necessarily a bad thing, and how we should use person-first language when talking about disabilities and differences. Stay tuned.
My name is Katy Fattaleh, and I am the senior program director for the NORA Project, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to teach empathy and spark friendships between students and their peers with disabilities. Previous to joining the NORA Project, I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher, and then I was a technology coach, and then I was an instructional coach. I have also done a lot of work in the Chicagoland area with curriculum writing, and I've done some consulting here and there as well.
Wow. So you've had quite the journey in your professional educational career.
Yes, very much so.
So yours kind of sounds similar to mine, your pathway. So what prompted you to go from being a teacher to a tech coach?
When I was in the classroom, maybe even before that, when I was student teaching, it occurred to me that technology came very easily to me, more easily to me than some of my colleagues. And I found myself being pulled out of my classroom a lot to support other people in the building. I was called upon to do professional development. In an assembly, when something stopped working, people would call out to the audience, "Katy, can you come up here, please?" And so it made me realize that maybe there was a future for me in that field. And so I went ahead and got my master's in technology and education. And then I wrapped up my time in the classroom and decided to try out my luck at tech coaching. And it was a great experience.
And so then you went to instructional coaching.
I did. So when I was in that technology coach role, I found myself then wanting to do so much with what I saw as a very natural implementation of technology in education, which was to work on the curriculum, to work on the sound instructional practices and help teachers utilize technology in a way that made their teaching more effective and more efficient. And so what I saw was that in my role as a technology coach, I was working more on the sort of nuts and bolts of tech, where I really wanted to be pushing teachers thinking and using technology as a way to do that. So, I actually think that technology coaches probably universally really want to do that work. And I found for myself that an instructional coaching role allowed me a little more flexibility in the way I was able to work with teachers.
So were you an instructional coach that focused or led people, especially in the realm of their technology integration?
Not officially, but I would say that I see appropriate use of technology as a great way to enhance students' experiences and the teaching profession. So I think that in everything that I do, technology is a piece of that. And so I, end up bringing that to the table. That's a lens that I look through in all of my work with teachers.
Sure. Okay. And then you went to the NORA Project, which is a nonprofit, right?
Yes.
And
yes. And
so you left the teacher retirement system.
I did.
Which is something I've never been able to get myself to do.
Yes, I did. I took a leap of faith and I stepped away from public education. So the founder of the NORA Project, Amanda Martinson, was a former teammate of mine when I was in the classroom. And
okay.
She created this project, and she was ready to return to the classroom full time. And she gave me a call and asked me to step into the role. And it has been an incredible shift for me, and one that was unexpected. But stepping into the realm of nonprofit in general, but also being able to affect change in schools from the outside has been a really exciting opportunity for me.
And I'm sure you were talking about a lens earlier. I'm sure the lens through which you view education is even different now than when you were in a building. Yes.
And it's so helpful that I've had exposure to a lot of different schools, each unique in its own way, because it is really, it has made it easier for me to implement changes and revisions to our curriculum and in creating new curriculum that is useful for people in a variety of settings. And it has really allowed me to sort of take some of the things that I have experienced and observed in a variety of school settings and think about them in a different way, and provide materials to help support teachers in addressing some of the situations that I went through and didn't have the language or the tools to be able to function at my best in those moments.
Yeah. And I think providing people with that, like you said, both the language and the tools is very important.
Mm-hmm. Especially for a topic like disability and difference, which is one that we really don't talk about that much in schools. We are always having important conversations about students and their needs, but as diversity and equity become bigger topics of conversation in so many districts, we aren't always talking about disability and difference explicitly. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that most adults have never had an education in disability awareness, myself included. Most teachers have not had special education training, myself included. And we're lacking a lot of the tools and the language to feel comfortable having a conversation, particularly an honest conversation about, what we see, what we need, and how to help our students know and understand one another better so that they can create better community, better relationships.
Yes, to all of that. So this is the first show of our third season here on the Teacher's Classroom. And I'm so excited that you're on the show because empathy, I think, is one of those topics that is vital. And if it's not being taught at home, then we need to make sure it's being taught in the schools. And it sounds like you're in a position to really help us tear that apart and look a little deeper. So thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So when we talk about empathy as a lens through which to look at disability, like you said, let's look a little bit about empathy and what that is as opposed to sympathy or compassion or any one of those.
Definitely. So in our programs, and I'd highly recommend this to anybody, you can find it on YouTube. Brene Brown put out, in one of her TED Talks, she talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And somebody took a clip from that TED Talk and added a little bit of an animation to it. And it gives a really good baseline understanding of the difference between empathy and sympathy. And, it really boils down to empathy is being there with the person who is feeling or suffering, right? Sympathy is noticing it and being like, ooh, that sucks. And it's not necessarily that sympathy doesn't require as much human connection. And then compassion adds kind of another level where it's empathy plus doing something about it. It's empathy plus taking action, pro-social behavior. So, when we think about empathy, we think about teaching kids not only to imagine the world through another person's eyes, to sort of come to understand who they are and how and why they feel certain ways, but also to take steps to support a person in a way that will be truly helpful to them.
So if we're looking at it as those three emotions as sort of a continuum, sympathy would be at the bottom, or the building, I guess the bottom we'll call it, where you're just identifying the emotion that the other person has. Right. So if you're sending a sympathy card, you're identifying that, they must be sad. Right.
Right. And maybe extending some similar, maybe acknowledgement. So it's like recognizing plus acknowledgement.
Okay. And then you build on it a little bit to be empathetic, to feel empathy, which means that if you were then going to extend that metaphor some more, in addition to sending a sympathy card, you might write a message that says what? Something like, I've been there. How can I help? Or even just showing up and, being with a person to help them with whatever they need in that moment. And so for kids at school, you're saying that we should be teaching more empathy.
Yeah. And the thing that's important to know about empathy is that you aren't born with or without it. It's something that is developed like a muscle. And so we can cultivate it in kids by helping them understand what it is, but then also coaching them through opportunities to practice it. And so, that's a big part of the curriculum work that we do, is building in opportunities for students to do to have some explicit instruction in what empathy is, what it looks like, what it feels like, but then also giving them opportunities to interact with their peers in an environment where teachers know what to look for and can coach them in really practicing those empathy skills that they've been learning about.
And I would think that I have my administrator hat now on, that I used to have kids come to my office all the time. And it seems like for discipline referrals, right? A pink slip. They were pink in my building. They'd have a pink slip and they'd come down to the office. And I did so much coaching rather than discipline that I think that I'd had some of this. So I hope that this also includes administrators, especially those that deal with discipline, because I think that those people need to be empathetic as well, for sure.
No doubt. And so, one of the most interesting pieces of this work for me, considering my background, is obviously I started my career focused on working with children, and coming up with innovative ways and to carry out best practices was really important to me. And then as I grew in my career, it also became really important to me to push on the practice of other educators and to collaborate and learn from my peers and to understand, what people were doing. And in this role, I get to do a little bit of both of those things. I get to take what I know about best practice and affecting student learning, and I can put that in a package with what I know about what adults need, what adult learners need, and how difficult it is to build on students' social emotional learning skills in school with very few resources and without much training. So, it's been a really great experience for me to be able to not only provide things that I know are good for kids, but also to provide really strong professional development and ongoing coaching for teachers as they work through these programs that we've built.
Yeah, because it seems like we as adults never had this explicit education. I mean, I got it from my parents, who were educators themselves, and so very compassionate and, I believe, empathetic. But then trying to relate that and put it into words when I had kids come down to my office who were not empathetic was difficult, because I knew what it was supposed to feel like, but I didn't have the language to explain it, I think, is probably where the barrier was. Definitely. And so I found myself calling in the social worker. I'm like, help, what do I say? I know what the outcome's supposed to be, but I don't know how to get this across.
Yes. And I think as schools prioritize social emotional learning, more and more resources are coming to us that help support that work. But what we pride ourselves on at the NORA Project is, like I said before, that experiential learning component. So giving kids an opportunity to really practice that. But then also elevating this idea of disability and difference in that social emotional learning. Because, when we encounter someone who seems at first to be very different from us, it is more difficult to demonstrate empathy for that person, towards that person. And so what we're hoping to achieve, among other things at the NORA Project, is we want to demystify disability and to normalize difference from a young age. We're starting in preschool to help kids understand that disability and difference are a part of the human condition. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. And as such, it's something that we should all know about, because 1 in 5 people have a disability, identify as having a disability. So we're talking about a big chunk of students in our schools, adults that we interact with on a daily basis. I mean, and if you don't have a disability today, if you don't identify as having a disability today, you could later in your life. So it's really something that everyone should know about. And so what we have found is that by building in opportunities for kids to have the tools to learn about one another, know how to ask appropriate questions, know how to focus on what they have in common, it helps them to develop the understanding of one another that allows for empathy to be practiced freely.
So I'm jotting down notes here because I like what you said about disability and differences being just part of the human condition. One thing that's really been on my mind recently is how we as, I don't know if it's humans or just our society, tends to live in the world of superlatives where whether things are the worst or that's the best. And so there's really, that kind of either it is or it isn't. And so, if you're not perfect, then you must be not good.
Yeah. And so, societally, there's a stigma around disability and difference. There just is. And we're really trying to break that down by helping people understand it as something that, a lot of people experience. And as I said, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. We were lucky to have Heather Lanier come to our summer training camp this year. She has a TED Talk that went viral. And she speaks about her experience having a child with a disability and sort of going through the stages of understanding disability in this way, that, it's not a tragedy. And it's not, a person with a disability is not necessarily a hero, right? It's just a part of who that person is. And a person with a disability may identify very strongly with their disability or may not. And it's all very person specific. So what we're encouraging in our curriculum and in our adult training as well is that you consider the individual, that you get to know a person, and that you don't make assumptions based on one part of a person's identity, about who they are or what they need or how they feel about something.
And so you said you work with preschoolers in this. What does that look like in a preschool classroom? So our early elementary program is suitable for pre-K through third grade. We've got two different levels of that. And it looks a lot like other more traditional social emotional learning programs in that it is short, little lessons. A lot are based on interactive read-alouds or activities, but kids are getting explicit instruction in things like emotional literacy and emotional regulation. They're getting instruction in friendship skills. And in addition to all of that, at the NORA Project, we're giving them explicit instruction in disability awareness, and in how to adapt activities so that everyone can be included. And we're teaching them about what it means, what it looks like, what it feels like to be an includer. So we're giving them lots of examples of that relate directly to what they see in their own classroom. And so multiple exposures to these different skills. And then we provide teachers with training that helps them sort of weave those themes into the rest of their curricular day, their school day, so that it's not just one exposure per week. The kids are hearing these themes over and over. We have data that suggests that the more times teachers are talking about themes of the NORA Project throughout the week, the better students' gains are in their empathy growth. So we encourage teachers to bring it up as often as possible. Well, and then to have that common vocabulary be woven throughout the day, I think. Yes. And so
it comes in really handy in unstructured times.
Oh, for sure.
When you are experiencing something in the playground and you aren't sure how to address it, hopefully kids will have gotten some explicit instruction in it in the primer pack, and you can just take that anchor chart and put it to good use in an authentic
Right.
situation.
Yeah. Cafeteria, PE.
Group
Yes.
work, hallway.
Yeah,
You
for
name it.
sure. You mentioned how you show people or explain to people what it feels like to be an includer.
Yeah.
So that would be the teacher then, or is that anyone who takes action to make other people feel wanted, part of the group?
Yeah. Yep. An includer is someone who pays attention to the people around them and uses their, in our primer pack, we use the term be a feelings detective. And so we, as I said, we teach kids about emotional literacy. So, for our younger students, we address less complex emotions, happy, sad, confused. But then as students get older, we layer in more nuanced emotions. And we talk about how those feel, what they look like. We talk about body language. We talk about, how to understand a person's reaction, where they might be coming from, and then how to help them in a given situation. So kids go through scenarios, and we've tried really hard. So all of our program team staff are all former teachers. And so we really work hard to come up with ideas for these scenarios that are truly things that kids will see in their everyday life in the classroom.
Yes, because we've all seen curriculum that has scenarios that have nothing to do with real life.
Yes. Unfortunately, a lot of curriculum is not written by teachers. So this one is, and I'm proud of that.
It sounds like your curriculum is also different in that you are focusing on people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And I mean, even just that word makes it sound like something that's bad or not normal. So I guess you just, maybe it'd be better to say you focus on all the differences that are out there.
Yeah. So actually, the word disability, this has been a topic that we've been talking about a lot recently. There's some question a lot of the time around the word disability. Like, isn't that a bad word? And actually, we believe that the word disability is a word associated with rights. It is a word used in the legislation that is there to support individuals with disabilities. And so we feel really strongly about using the word, and there's a lot of talk in the disability community about using the word disability rather than euphemisms such as special needs or others, because it is the word that describes what we're talking about. And it is the word associated with rights. And so we do use the word disability proudly. But we also, when we're talking about disability, we're talking about visible and invisible disabilities, right? So physical disabilities that a person might be able to see, but also invisible disabilities that you might not notice. And then, of course, there's a spectrum, and there's also difference that sort of falls maybe inside of an identified disability or maybe not. So, behavioral differences, sometimes even cultural differences. So yes, we're addressing those explicitly because we, first of all, want to elevate disability as a part of the conversation in schools, but in society. It doesn't get a lot of representation as such a significant marginalized group. It doesn't get a lot of airtime. We don't see a disability in the media very often. We don't hear about it very often in stories. And so we are trying to elevate it as an issue that everyone should know about and should be talking about ways to support individuals with disabilities in all walks of life.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah. Okay. So most of our listeners here are classroom teachers, as we both were. You talked about how the lessons that the NORA Project has for the PK, the preschool through third grade, is like read alouds and real quick scenarios, that kind of thing. Can you give like something real quick that a later grade school, say 4th and 5th grade teacher, could do in their classroom?
You bet. So with our intermediate students especially, we really try to take a constructivist approach, because we think that this is a time when kids are already like looking around and questioning everything that they're learning. And so what we've found is giving students at that age some kind of provocation, whether it is a scenario like we talked about before, one maybe that they are experiencing currently in their school, or a text or a question. We do this in a lot of ways in our Storyteller project, and then give kids time to reflect on it and discuss it. And then over time, revisit that question or revisit that text and allow kids to revise their understanding of it, synthesize information over time. We found that that's a really effective way of inspiring students in that intermediate age level to start questioning the world around them.
So a teacher could take a short story or a book or whatever they're reading currently, and have the students look at the characters and maybe point out disabilities or differences and have a discussion, or how the other characters relate to them.
Yeah,
and,
so maybe, Yes, exactly. So we actually base our Storyteller project on 3 essential questions. What does it mean to be a good friend? Why is there no such thing as normal? And why do we share our stories with others? And these 3 questions sort of guide the work that students do through this year-long project. And those 3 questions, even just posing those 3 questions to students at multiple points throughout a school year as they're learning about empathy, their answers to those questions change over time. And that's a really interesting process of growth. But what we also see is that as students are, thinking about, for example, as you said, if you're reading a story in class and there's a piece of that story that relates in some way to empathy, and you ask kids to reflect on it, and you ask them to think about, like, was this character showing empathy to the other character? Why or why not? How could they have? Once you start to get them aware of what empathy looks like and feels like, then you can start doing that important coaching that we talked about earlier in those unstructured times of the day. And we actually have a resource on our website called our Interabled Activity Planning Guide, which has a section on supporting students before, during, and after inclusive activities that are a part of our Storyteller project. But it can also be applied in a lot of situations that anytime that students are working or playing together, there's some look-fors for teachers about how to identify things that you might want to help coach students through, and then suggestions for how to do that so that they can approach a situation in the most empathetic way possible.
I could see those look-fors being helpful for all ages. Yeah. So I taught 7th grade.
Yes.
So what could I have done with my 7th graders?
So our Storyteller project is a pretty universal for 4th through 8th grade. But, honestly, as kids get into middle school, so this is a good time for me to draw a really important distinction. So oftentimes people associate our work with service work. And I want to be clear that the NORA Project is not a service project. It is a project to help cultivate a mindset in students and adults, an ability-inclusive mindset, which just means helping them to view the world as, everybody is here and everybody is worthy of being known, and I should be a good friend to as many people as I can. I need to know and understand people in order to show empathy to them. So I think that as we move towards middle school age, we do a lot of work with middle schoolers, 7th and 8th graders, that is in the, service-oriented arena. And that is a really great way to teach students important skills. But as we are trying to teach empathy through relationships, we think that the best way to do that is to give students opportunities just to interact with one another, to understand that we are all on a level playing field in terms of our human dignity and our worth, our deservingness of friendships, and giving kids opportunities to really get to know each other, not necessarily as doing a good deed, but instead as, this relationship with your peer will enrich you, because it will give you another person in your life to support you.
Well, and at that age, kids are all about their friends and peer groups and things like that. So
yes,
it makes total sense. And then as we move into the older kids, high school and such, what does this inclusivity curriculum look like there?
So once students are in high school, it seems like we can touch on things that are, maybe a little bit more complex or even potentially controversial. But the best way to cultivate empathy in a high school environment is to make it safe to be vulnerable. And so, we can have deep, important, reflective conversations with high schoolers, but we have to make it a safe environment where everyone can participate, feeling like they can share without fear of saying the wrong thing. And so one of the things that we coach teachers in is how to create this environment where that safety is felt by all. But we also provide materials that help teach kids how to ask respectful questions, with resources about how to speak appropriately and compassionately about disability and difference. And so I would recommend teaching the language of disability and difference, person first language, and also, what questions are appropriate and how to ask them, before opening up those conversations. And then I think you can give kids lots of really interesting provocations and have deep conversations. So our inclusion handbook is on the website, and that gives you some guidance about how to ask respectful questions, and how to use person first language. And that is a really helpful resource in getting those conversations started. As
a kind of a closing question, can you just give me an example of what person first language would sound like?
Yes. So person first language is putting the person before the disability. And before I give you that example, I want to say that we advocate for using person first language in situations where a person's preference is not known. But of course, an individual with a disability is the person who gets to decide how they identify and what type of language they'd like used when we talk about them or talk with them. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there that individuals with disabilities have every right to choose to identify in any way that they choose. But for example, person first language would be saying, Cindy has autism, as opposed to Cindy is autistic. Or instead of saying Joey is learning disabled, you would say Joey learns in a different classroom. So basically just putting the person, who they are, before their disability, and not assuming that disability sort of defines who that person is.
So making it not an adjective that describes the person, but a noun, an attribute. There you go. Yeah.
An attribute. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Just one part of who they are.
All right. Katy, I don't want to take your whole day up. This has been a great conversation. I know I've learned a lot. How can people find the NORA Project or find you if they have further questions or want to get in touch?
So you can visit www.thenoraproject.ngo. And on our website, you'll find a number of free resources that can be used. And you can also get in touch with our program team if you're interested in learning more about our programs. And there's a lot of really, really great resources on the site. I'd highly encourage people to take a peek. And if you'd like to reach out to me, you can reach me at Katy that's Katy, at thenoraproject.ngo.
Perfect. Well, Katy, thank you so much for your time. And I will try to make some sense of all these notes I've taken and put them in the show notes at teachillinois.com/podcast. And you can find this episode and all these links to you and to the TED Talks you've mentioned will be up there as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Matt.
For this episode's show notes, past episodes, or how you can earn professional development hours for listening, visit teachillinois.com, your online portal for teacher learning. Thanks for listening.